walls with boughs of holly. Fa la 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 la. 'Tis the season to be jolly. Fa la 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 la. Don't we know our gay apparel? Fa la 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 la. Troll the ancient Yuletide carol. Fa la 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 la. Fa la 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 la. Don't we know our gay apparel? Fa la la, fa la la la. Troll the ancient Yuletide carol. Fa la 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 la, fa la 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 la, fa la 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 la.
The second Sunday in Advent is about hope. Lots of people have said wonderful words about hope. Langston Hughes said, "Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly." Emily Dickinson famously said, "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all." Maxine Hong Kingston reminds us that in a time of destruction, create something. You can cut all the flowers, says Pablo Neruda, but you cannot keep spring from coming. And when there is no hope, said Albert Camus, it is incumbent on us to invent it. So that's why we're here. To kindle, create, conjure, and otherwise make hope happen. As the ancients lit fires to bring back the sun, we light our hearts with candles and dreams so that hope will never die. The candle of hope, which we all carry in our hearts, will now be lit symbolically but very genuinely by Hadley Newhouse. And so let us give voice to our hope as we rise and sing, perhaps not with the same panache and elan as Robin Connell, but with more zeal and joy. Deck the hall with boughs of holly. Shall we sing together? did that very well. I think you've heard that one before. That helps. I'd like you to join with me now as we share words from the poet Ted Hughes as our responsive invocation. The only calibration that counts is how much heart people invest, how much they ignore their fears of being hurt or caught out or humiliated. And the only thing people regret is that they didn't live boldly enough, that they didn't invest enough heart, didn't love enough. Nothing else really counts. There's the ring of truth in that, I would say. I'd like to introduce a couple of folks now. A member of our church, Mike Wolfe, and Cheryl, how do I pronounce your last? Schuch? Who will tell you all more about, I think, Family Promise, correct? Among other things, which is our offering for today. Come on up here, folks.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Thanks for having me today. For those of you who don't know, Family Promise is an organization that works with families with children who are experiencing a housing crisis and find themselves homeless. And we work with them to provide shelter, basic needs, services, help finding a new home, and permanent housing. And I want to start this morning by just thanking you because this congregation and the body of Fountain Street Church has already done incredible work supporting our families over the past 7 years, both with volunteers who partner with First UMC, which is one of our host sites, in providing overnight shelter to families and playing with kids and serving meals and doing great work there, and also through the Social Action Committee grants, which have supported many of the direct basic needs for the families and access to housing for them. So thank you for what you've already done. It's been amazing. I'm here today to thank you also for a new partnership and some work we're going to do together this year for a program called Partners in Housing. Family Promise here in Grand Rapids started that program about 10 years ago, and it's a program that uses manufactured homes in mobile home parks around the community to provide affordable housing for families. Very much like our partners at Habitat, we purchase the homes, rehab the homes, and then move families from shelter into the homes and work with them for about 9 months. And a family can go from homeless in the shelter to home ownership in that period of time for the cost of about $7,600. So we are going to partner this coming year with you as volunteers and also through the financial support of the congregation to provide 2 homes for families this coming year. It's going to be an amazing effort. These families are incredibly grateful. We've had over 120 families go into this type of housing over the last 10 years. 96% of them are wildly successful and still housed a couple years later. Many of them have sold the units back to us as they've been ready to go on to bigger housing as their families have grown, and they've actually used that as a deposit to go into single-family home ownership. So it's been an incredible program to provide them those resources and take them from a really dark space to a really beautiful one. So thank you. I want to bring Michael up now. He's had some great experience working with our families, and he can tell you a little bit about who they are.
Good morning. So I'm Mike Wolfe. I want to just say a little bit about our family's experience volunteering with Family Promise. So we all have stereotypes, right? As a liberal religious congregation, we may not want to acknowledge that, or we may feel uncomfortable with that a little bit. But if I said, picture a homeless family, an image might pop into your mind. Maybe you'd catch yourself and think, oh, I shouldn't be making these assumptions, but these things happen. And one of the things that has been so meaningful for our family, my wife Jill and I have 5 kids between the 2 of us, 4 boys and a girl, and volunteering with Family Promise has really taught us a lot about the breadth or the range of the types of families that can struggle with homelessness, and has really sort of helped us to address our stereotypes of what homeless families look like. So on a typical night volunteering with Family Promise, this is over at the First United Methodist Church on Fulton, we would have dinner with the families who are staying there, and then we go upstairs. There's a playroom upstairs where we'd spend a couple hours, usually playing with the kids. Sometimes the parents will want to hang out and chat. Sometimes the parents are exhausted and just want to go back into the room. And on one night, this was in the summer, there were some boys there about the same age as our boys, and so we went out to play basketball. There's a parking lot across the street that has a little basketball court. The church has a basketball, so we got the ball, and we went over there, and we spent maybe an hour and a half playing basketball, and the boys talked about things that boys talk about, you know, what sports do you play, where do you go to school, stuff like that. And when we were in the car on the way home, we were talking about it a little bit. And one of my sons said, you know what's weird? If somebody were to walk by and see us playing, and you said to that person, some of these kids are homeless, and some of them are not homeless, which ones are the homeless ones? You would have no way to know. And we talked about that a little bit and decided that he was right. The kids that we were playing with, they dressed like our kids, they talked like our kids, they were white, they had cell phones, they had sneakers like our kids. You know, sneakers are a big thing. And that kind of experience, I think, has been really meaningful to us because it taught us a lot about the kinds of families that can struggle with homelessness. These kids went to school in the neighborhood by our house. The Little League field that we play at is at the school where these kids went. And it really kind of taught them and all of us that people of all sorts of backgrounds, including ours, can struggle with these sorts of issues. And it has certainly been enriching for our family to interact some with families who are maybe a little bit different than ours, but also to see that people like us struggle with these issues. So I hope in some way that us working with Family Promise helps the families, but I know it helps our family to expand our horizons and just to get to chat with new people. So that is my story, and welcome to Fountain Street Church. You belong here. Thank you.
How many of you knew we were involved in Family Promise? Excellent. How many of you are more likely to get involved in Family Promise? You're going to find you've already met a few of your friends, not just at the church either. An Advent reading is a time in the years that I've been here to share a common passage that is associated with the year. I want to remind everyone who is going to character school to listen to this reading and to the music afterward, because your fellow character schoolers are going to do it. They'd love to have a cheering section, okay, folks? So you stay here until they're finished singing. Now, there are lots of Christmas readings. The one I like for this Sunday, let me get the right piece of paper, goes like this. This is from the New York Sun, published September 21st, 1897. It begins, "We take pleasure in answering thus prominently the communication below, expressing at the same time our great gratification that its faithful author is numbered among the friends of the Sun. Dear editor, I am 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there is no Santa Claus. Papa says if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? Signed, Virginia O. Hanlon, 115 West 95th Street, New York, New York. Virginia, your little friends are wrong. They have been affected by the skepticism of a skeptical age. They do not believe except they see. They think that nothing can be, which is not comprehensible by their little minds. All minds, Virginia, whether they be men's or children's, are little. In this great universe of ours, man is a mere insect, an ant in his intellect as compared with the boundless world about him, as measured by the intelligence capable of grasping the whole of truth and knowledge. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist, and you know that they abound and give to your life its highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would the world be if there were no Santa Claus. It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. There would be no childlike faith then, no poetry, no romance to make tolerable this existence. We should have no enjoyment except in sense and sight. The eternal light with which childhood fills the world would be extinguished. Not believe in Santa Claus, you might as well not believe in fairies. You might get your papa to hire men to watch in all the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus, but even if you did not see Santa Claus coming down, what would that prove? Nobody sees Santa Claus, but that is no sign that there is no Santa Claus. The most real things in the world are those that neither children nor men can see. Did you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not. But that's no proof they are not there. Nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders there are unseen and unseeable in the world. You tear apart the baby's rattle to see what makes the noise inside, but there is a veil covering the unseen world which not the strongest man, nor even the united strength of all the strongest men that ever lived could tear apart. Only faith, poetry, love, romance can push aside that curtain and view and picture the supernal beauty and glory beyond. Is it real? Virginia, in all this world, there is nothing else real and abiding. No Santa Claus? Thank God he lives and lives forever. 1,000 years from now, Virginia, nay, 10 times 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make glad the heart of childhood. And there ends the Advent reading. So at this point, our character school community can make their way out, and I'm going to invite James to join me just a moment. We're going to go into the pulpit because we have a microphone up there as we talk about your morning offering. Hey, James, how are you? Let's go on up here. Now, we are a downtown church, and because we're a downtown church, we intersect with lots of different folks, James among them, and many of those, maybe those who would be described as folks without homes or housing insecure or whatever the name happens to be. And we see them, some of them almost every Sunday, including you. And we've learned a lot more about you and others by being close to one another for some weeks. And last year, you started a project that you're renewing this year, and I wanted you to describe it just a little bit before we take our offering. Tell people who you are, and then what's up.
Everybody, welcome, Fountain Street Church. My name is James, and last year I started Homeless Artists for the Homeless campaign as a way of raising awareness and alms for less fortunate in our community. And it was a success, and we bought vouchers, different churches that were involved, which is including our church, dégagé cards, which we were able to pass out to homeless people that needed a meal or a place to do their laundry or many other things that we take for granted in the community. And we did really well, and this year I have 2 of the old cards from last year, and then I have a new one called Bangle Bells, and it talks about a little bit about me on the back, and they come with an envelope, and half the money comes to help our program here to help the homeless, which is pretty substantial at Fountain Street. And I'm just very grateful that you guys allow me to be here. And I also want to take this opportunity to bring up, we had to make some hard decisions this year with the portico. Yeah. And, at first I didn't really, find it, comforting. And I was concerned mostly for my less fortunate friends, brothers and sisters that, use the place. And it's been that way for a few years, as I'm told. Yeah. And, but, we always don't know what God wants. And it all turned out okay because the church came together and we actually held a pizza party for all the people that were using the portico. And we brought in homeless organizations in the community. And we actually got 8 people with housing out of like a population of 24 or 45. The rest of them are on their way, and all the rest of them, including myself, is in the shelter because there's nobody out here to really ministry to. And, it just shows you how God works through this church. And, I just want to say that people ask me all the time, what's the answer to the homeless? And as far as I can tell, it's just to love everyone, no matter what their situation is, because for any given night, for any given reason, somebody could become homeless. And that was the population that comes and is drawn towards this church. And I want to just read a little bit out of the Old Testament.
Just a little bit here, James.
All right. It says, Moses says, he says, among you, if one of your brothers should become poor in your towns, within your land, the Lord your God has given you, you shall not harden your heart or shut your hand to the poor brother. For there will never cease to be poor in the land. Therefore, I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy, and to the poor. Mm-hmm. I think that's the answer. And there's a lot of love in this church, and I'm so proud of you guys. Thank you.
Well, James, we're proud of you too. Thank you. And I want to let you know that every week we say something like this. This is Fountain Street Church, and you belong here.
Thank you, brother.
As the bell chorus gets together, this is the time when we take our offering. And as we mention every week, every bit of cash that you put into that plate goes to people who are not inside our walls on a regular basis. Could be, but it could be you, or it could be James, or it could be anyone, because we believe our offering should not be for us, but from us. So let your offering on this plate be how you wish to be present in the world during this Advent season. And if the bells make you feel cheerful, don't let that inhibit your generosity. Your morning offering to ring loud the bells of hope will now be most gratefully received. want to see the sheet music from my angle, because there's a lot of little black dots. And it's really hard to keep track of all of them. And I know it looks pretty straightforward from your angle, but coordinating all these people, making all these noises at just the right moment is considerable work. So I'm really, and by the way, there's always room for more bell ringers in training. We like that, so that's wonderful. Now, I'm going to start the prayer, and I'm going to move a little bit, so the choir is going to move into position, because they have one of my favorite pieces they're doing, and I want to make sure they're ready to do it. I love this piece that they're coming up on. Because, in part, it ends with a hymn tune that we heard last week, and we'll hear all through Advent. How brightly shines the morning star, what lovely radiance from afar does glad us with its time. It's a beautiful Christmas, but also general notion. And I need it, especially this time of year, because I don't know about you, but it was really like cloudy for a really, really long time, like every morning and every afternoon and every evening. And every now and then they said, we're going to see the sun today, and it didn't, and I was really down about it. And yet we've gotten a little sky, and isn't it marvelous when you can see the sky, your mood kind of lifts with it? It's almost as though the clouds push down on our hearts, at least for me. I'm sure there are others who take comfort in them, not so much me. And I'd like you to think about that, because it's not just the sunshine that gives us cause to be hopeful. Sometimes it's starlight. And in fact, for sailors of long ago, the stars were a more reliable guide than the sun. They'd get out their astrolabe, their sextant, or whatever they used to measure the stars and see how far north they were or how far south. They could see from the stars the seasons. We take more from the stars than we realize. And so I'll start a prayer about stars with a little story about the family that was so busy going in and out of the house, doing things for Christmas time, that at one point a little kid stops them in mid-hurry and say, "You be glad at that star." We need to be glad at that star, because it doesn't show up nearly often enough on a winter night in West Michigan. Let's be glad about that star in prayer. Oh, you star, you who made the poet write the lines and the composer to write the notes, that we should choose something like you to hang our hopes upon. Not the sun nor the warmth of summer, but that pinprick of light that sits in a canopy of black and blue. Oh, star, what is it about you that in your brilliant silence makes us hope more? Perhaps we don't need to know, but we certainly want you there. And after the clouds have passed, which sometimes means many days, we are glad at that star. We are glad at all the stars that are out there. And if we choose one for our own heart to wish upon or hope upon, to have faith in, to rejoice in, have we not fulfilled the commandment to love? For what is it but love that makes us look upward to some small sparkle in the sky that means nothing and then yet fills us with gladness? Yes, let us be glad at that star, nameless, distant, frail, so easily hidden. Let us be glad at that star and every star that reminds us that night is no loss and darkness is no omen. For only then can we see the future that we find in the stars. Upon these things, we pause in the reverent silence that is the truest and inmost prayer. And amen. Now prepare your hearts to listen for the star. Preachers should set good moral examples, and last week I could not lay my hands upon the sheet of paper that contained the names of those who died at that time in years past, so I'm bringing them all together this week. They always deserve to be lifted up, no matter when. And I mention them each week because I think it's important for us to keep our dead as well as our living close at hand. After all, everyone, we're going to spend a lot more time with them than we are with each other. But my point here is that we are always surrounded by those who are not present in body, but ever present in the works that they did for us. And it is wise ever to be humbled by their surrounding presence. Each week, then, I read names, which I will do in just a moment, and read a piece of a prayer called El Malei Rachamim, which comes out of the Jewish tradition, because I love the text. And I lift up the Jewishness of it today, A, because it is a beautiful text, and B, because we are in the midst of the minor feast of Hanukkah, the Feast of Rededication. That's a whole other story with much complexity, but the notion of rededication is powerful, because in a sense, we have a moment every week to rededicate ourselves. And so we ask ever to be worthy of the task we are about, and that's certainly my wish. And so I invoke now the blessing and the memory of the names of those whose lives were completed at this time in years past, whose presence here made these walls and filled them with song and hope, with love and joy and faith, and gave to us a legacy which is far greater than we understand. I lift up especially the names of Bill Koistra and Kathleen Bucknam and Carl Green and Gerald Anderson and Ron Bilesma and Neva Brew, Shirley Wilmarth, Bonnie Price, Lillian Honecker, John Bissell, Arlene MacDonald, Lee Rasmussen, Rufus Teasdale, and Mary Murphy. El Malei Rachamim Shokim Barachamim, God filled with mercy, dwelling in the heavens heights, bring proper rest beneath the wings of your Shekinah, your presence to the souls of our beloved who have gone to their eternal place of rest. May you, who are a source of mercy, shelter them beneath your wings eternally, and bind their souls to you and to we the living, that they may rest in peace, that we may be at peace, and let us say, Amen. I'm focusing my words all year long, including Advent, on the most unusual Jew in the Bible, that is Paul, who was supposed to be the first Christian, but is really the most earnest Jew you can find. He just does it very differently from all the other Jews, but he's very earnest. We know this from all the letters he left, of which 7 are authentic. And I'm looking at his letter to the Philippians, to a community of Jesus followers in Philippi who are not Jewish, so he's having to speak to them in different words or in different ways. And the passage that comes to mind today is in the 2nd chapter of that letter. Therefore, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed me, not only in my presence, but much more now in my absence, work out your own salvation in fear and trembling. Hence the title. Now, I'm going to start by saying certain books belong to certain ages. Now, I don't mean ages of history, I mean ages of life. How many adolescents or former adolescents remember reading Catcher in the Rye and being transformed by its frank and honest tone? I didn't read it till I was in my 40s, and then I found its hero obnoxious and annoying, like most adolescents. Read it when you're 15. It will be valuable to you then. Don't read it when you're 40, when it just sounds like your children. Conversely, the Scarlet Letter, which is a magnificent piece of literature, should never be taught to a 12 or a 13-year-old. It's obtuse and tedious to a younger person, but it is deep, profound, and troubling to someone in their 40s. I think many a good book has been ruined by being taught in English class. And I mention this because I found a phrase running through my head, and it led me back to some books I read in my 20s. Some of you may remember when John Irving was popular with his book, The World According to Garp and the Hotel New Hampshire, which I found very entertaining when I was about 27 or 28 years old. And they were filled with improbable plots and eccentric characters. And they were appealing at the time, but not so much anymore, in part because they were rather contrived and obvious. But what came to mind as I thought about Fear and Trembling was a phrase I associated with that book in error. This is what happens when you get old. Your Rolodex gets all mixed up and the cards don't line up the way. I said, well, didn't he have a phrase in there about hope floats? No, he didn't. It was sorrow that floated. Sorrow was the name of a dog that once it died they had stuffed, and after a plane accident, floated on the sea. And so sorrow floats, there's the obvious reference. But remember, I didn't remember sorrow. I had to look up hope floats, didn't find it, found out instead it was let's call it, in my opinion, a rather cheesy Southern rom-com in the Sweet Home Alabama, Steel Magnolia variety of rom-coms, which I don't watch because I just generally don't care for them. But the phrase actually does not come from the movie. It comes from, of all people, Charles Dickens, who gestured toward it in a book nobody reads called Dombey and Son. The character, Captain Cuttle, speaks rather more critically, saying, hope is a buoy, but like any buoy, it only floats. It can't be steered anywhere. That's a really key insight. Hardly encouraging. It really describes hope as being something we hang on to, but it won't get us anywhere. But I want you to know that I was locked in trying to figure this out for hours this week. Hope floats, sorrow floats. I dug through the internet like a research monster. And as I contemplated that question, the screen staring back at me over and over again, I did the only thing possible when you confront writer's block. I did the laundry. I did a load of darks, and then I tried to clean out the refrigerator, found a little jar with Michigan cherry preserves way in the back that had only 1 teaspoon, so I ate it, and then I rinsed it out and put it in the recycling, and then I went back to the screen, and I still hadn't thought of anything. And I'm not sure if hope or sorrow was floating, but there was nothing there right then. And I wrote and I rewrote and I unwrote, and as happens every week, I wonder if anything sensible is left in this shriveling walnut that is my brain. And I know the pattern very well, from inspiration to desperation and ultimately to resignation, saying something will turn up, but you can never guess when or how or where. That's very different from our friend Paul, who is never at a loss for words. He's dashing things off. Actually, he's dictating, but you can tell he's got a face full of words he wants to share. And he's writing to the Philippians and all these guys. And he's writing to the folks in Philippi, which is a town up in Macedonia. And he's writing from prison. I guess when you don't have much to do, you write. He is one loquacious fellow, though, because he goes on and on. The point is that of all his letters, this one's actually the most upbeat that he's got. He mentions joy over and over again, reminding you he's in prison talking about joy. He wants to assure them of his safety, to explain why he is sending back a servant that was sent to help him out. He's telling them to be careful with what they hear on the street. Stick with it, guys. Keep the faith, all that kind of stuff. And to assure them that they have reasons to hope, including those words I just read. Therefore, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed me, not only in my presence, but much more now in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And didn't I just mention joy? So how does that work out? Well, we know the phrase, and this is where it comes from. Though, to be fair, there are 2 psalms that use the same phrase, and I'm thinking Paul knew them, and yet the people to whom he's writing don't know them, so he's probably just dragging the phrase out because he has it handy. In Psalm 55, it reads, "Fear and trembling have come upon me." So he was a very well-educated Jew. He knew this stuff. You know, like people come up with phrases they use over and over again. How many times do you hear someone say, at the end of the day, that you wish the day were ending, in fact? But we use set phrases, and this is one of them. But I remind you, he's not trying to be Jewish to them. He's trying to be Christian or Jesus following. And what comes to mind as I think about this fear and trembling phrase, at least I don't know what comes to your mind. I know what comes to mind. Do you remember how when Dorothy and the Scarecrow and all those guys in the movie went to see the wizard? And the wizard, I'm trying to make sure I wrote this down right. A great green globe of wizardness projected on a screen said, "And you, Scarecrow," and the music would go, "Ah!" And this wizard would say, "Have the effrontery to ask for a brain, you billowing bale of bovine fodder." And if you remember Ray Bolger, he wobbles all the way down, bowing and scraping. And that's just the point. Whether it's in a movie or in an ancient text, fear and trembling connotes a kind of unsteadiness, a weakness, a fear, a trembling before a great power. And that's what Paul is gesturing toward, that when approaching God, you are like approaching a king. And when you see the king, you don't stride up and say, "Hey, Your Majesty, how you doing?" Not just because it's cocky, but because the king has people with like weapons and can use them like whenever he wants. So you come with a certain degree of fear that whatever you're asking, A, the king could say no way, or B, off with his or her head. So fear and trembling is an experience many people had, whether going to a king, whether going to an employer, or to one's master because of slavery, or to one's father, because in the Roman Empire, a father literally owned his family and could dispatch with them whatever he wanted to do. Can we all say patriarchy? So fear and trembling is a very real experience for ancient people. A lot of knocking knees, a lot of anxiety. Now, I spent a good hour on a paragraph all about that, looking into all the stuff that goes into that. And you know, if you spend an hour writing a paragraph for a sermon, you're probably writing the wrong paragraph. So I threw it away, because where I want to go is to a book. So rather than making a nice subtle argument, no, I'm going to say what I'm going to talk about now is Søren Kierkegaard, who wrote a book called, guess what? Fear and Trembling. He's a Danish thinker, something of a theologian, who grabbed this phrase for a very powerful, short, dense, and very difficult book with a lot of semicolons, and I read it, and I'm still trying to figure it out. But there was a great passage near the beginning that I underlined, so I'm going to give it to you and a few others to give you a sense of what I'm trying to get to. Kierkegaard writes, "If at the foundation of all there lay only a wildly seething power which with which the obscure passions produced everything that is great and everything that is insignificant. If a bottomless void, never satiated, lies hidden beneath all, what would life then be but despair?" Did you get his point? At some point, we're all saying, maybe it's not worth it. It's a really long way of saying, is that all there is? It's a really complicated way of pulling our dread right in front of us. Or I surmised at some point while I was writing, that must be Danish for abandon hope, all ye who enter here. But he's not trying to be grim. He's trying to bring up the fact that we deny our anxiety, we deny our fear and trembling, and that we have to embrace it if we want to get past it. He starts with the riddles and paradoxes our own minds bring. He writes, for example, to contend with the whole world is a comfort, but to contend with oneself is dreadful. Think of how many people who opine constantly about politics, but whose lives are a mess. You get the sense of what he's saying. He then takes on the reality of making decisions, and they seem easy, but they're not. He says, fools and young men, remember how old this is, fools and young people prate about everything being possible. That, however, is a great error. Think about that. How often are we told, if you can conceive it, you can achieve it? But he's saying, no, you can't do that. He goes on. Spiritually speaking, everything is possible, but in the world of the finite, there is much that is not possible. And we know that. So why do we fall for that you can achieve it, anything is possible stuff? But we do. Because we don't want to deal with the impossible things, like I'm never going to be a power forward for the Los Angeles Lakers. Not happening. I can conceive it, but I cannot achieve it. I'm never going to win the Nobel Prize. I'm never going to go to the moon. Again, there are things that are not possible no matter what we think or want or hope. And that's his point. To have a realistic sense of the odds we live with. And then he observes how hard it is to distinguish between right and wrong, human right and what he would call divine wrong. He says the difference between sin and spiritual trial, for the conditions in both can be deceptively similar, is that temptation to sin is in accord with our inclination, but spiritual trial is contrary to our inclination. That's a fancy way of saying sin is doing something you know you shouldn't, and spiritual trial is resisting to do something you know you should. And yet they can appear very similar at times. Small sin. That paragraph I tried to write that didn't work, that was a sin. Why? Because I was trying to prove how educated, informed, and eloquent I was, and I am not. I wasn't trying to do what the sermon wanted. I wanted to do what I wanted to do. And a sermon is ultimately its own document, not just my thoughts. It demands that you speak truthfully, even if you don't like the truth, that you work for the good, even if you want to work for the beautiful. Yes, when I start a page, anything is possible, but only the true can land on it and stay there. And sometimes the truth is not what I want to tell. I want to tell you what I want to tell you. Spiritual trial says, write this, say that, even when you don't want to. Which is why I'm going to confess that I spent another hour this week trying to find the connection between hope and fear. I knew it was there. Kierkegaard has a wonderful quote, hope is a passion for the possible. And I looked and looked to find the origins of that, and I could not find it, which means it probably doesn't exist. But what I did find was that other psalm where it turns up, and that's in Psalm 2. Serve God in fear and rejoice in trembling. Did you just hear? Serve in fear and rejoice. Who rejoices in trembling? Come on, think about it. Who rejoices in trembling? So my mind was now all messed up. But I felt something very true was at work. Yeah, we tremble in fear and in dread. That happens. Oh, we've all had it. Who has not been in a narrow miss in an automobile accident and you sat there afterward shivering? That's a perfectly sane response. And many a soldier has trembled in combat, and rightly so. Or Thomas Jefferson, writing from a different perspective, talking about slavery, said, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. We've all had those kinds of tremblings, but we also tremble in grief when trying to speak our sorrow and are overwhelmed. It's unpleasant, but it's not frightening. We tremble for good things. I can remember my first romantic kiss, and I shivered, and so did you. Or saying I love you for the first time, or hearing it from your beloved. I can remember the first time my eldest at 4 said I love you, and I wept and shivered. And that's not a bad thing, is it? And I've stood here on this dais for many a wedding, watching the bride and groom who seemed so poised, putting on those rings, suddenly finding themselves unable to remember, unable to see clearly, hands shaking. And at that moment, I know they are committed to their love. And I live for those moments, whether they're here or at home or in life. I live for those moments, those surpassing moments when something more has come out of the ordinary, something unexpected that makes me tremble because of its unexpected power. I live for those moments, and I bet you do too. And you come here to get that, if not here, to get the memory of that. That sense that something more is out there that cannot be summoned or demanded or defined, but turns up when the choir sings or the organ plays or the light comes through the windows, and every now and then a word comes out of the preacher. And suddenly there's a little shiver, a little tremble that says something important is happening, and you want to hold on to it, but you can't. It just goes by, but you want it, and you feel it, and you prize it. And every week I stand up here, and in my heart of hearts, without you hearing me, I pray that I can say something that will get a shiver, a tremble, a hope, a joy in someone, because I can't give it to all of you every week. I can barely give it to myself. But every week I step into this pulpit feeling the weight of fear and hoping for trembling joy. Because if I don't feel the fear, I can't have the joy. If I cannot tremble in fear at failure, I cannot tremble with joy when something erupts and finds its way out of my mouth from whence I do not know. Hoping for trembling joy. I think that's it. When we talk about hope, I know children hope for great toys on Christmas Day, and high school seniors for letters of acceptance. We elders hope for assurance of good health every time we go to the doctor. Stockbrokers hope that the market will turn around before they sell the stocks. Preachers hope for good attendance. But as real as those hopes are, and they are very real, that's not our ultimate hope, is it? We want a trembling hope. We want a trembling joy. We want to think that somehow life will erupt in front of us, within us, and suddenly we will be unable to control ourselves because we will be trembling with joy. I can't give that to you every week. I can barely give it to myself once a year, but every now and then it happens. Whether it's a note of music, a shaft of light, a fortuitous word, or just the presence of love in the house, every now and then I tremble with joy, and that's what I hope every day. True hope. That we may all, ever and always, have times of trembling joy. May the word of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my Redeemer. Our closing hymn has a story. It was written during the Mexican War by a rather awkward pastor in the little town of Lancaster, Massachusetts. And it was his anti-war statement. Listen for the words. And you will hear that this is not just a beautiful thought about angels, but a plea for peace in a world that knew so little. Shall we sing together hymn number 244, It Came Upon the Midnight Clear. For you shall go out in joy and be led back in peace. The mountains and the hills shall burst into song, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. And we shall tremble when it happens, tremble in delight and joy, knowing that someday it will be, whether this day or another, knowing that this day, indeed every day, is a day which the Lord has made. And so let us rejoice and be glad in all of them. Amen and amen.